Hello everyone. Recently I've been watching a lot of videos on YouTube of people showing off their video game collections, so I thought I would do something similar with poetry books. I'm going to be leaving out certain areas of my collection, mostly compilation volumes with, 1,000 contemporary poems, and I'm also leaving out some individual books by people that I don't have a great interest in what they have to say. However, for some reason or another, I've not culled those volumes. But I've got a grand collection here, and I'll have a couple of items to note about each one. So let's go ahead and get started with Baudelaire. So this book I actually bought when I was living in Hartford. It was one of two or three books. The other one being, let me see. Now I got some philosophy books up there about the thoughts of various writers, and I got a something about the medieval period, the history of it. But anyway, this was my companion volume when I was suffering through some torment up there, and as you can see, I've went through. I guess it's going to be tough to note some of this stuff, but in a lot of cases, I've marked all over these books and underlined, and in some cases, gone back through and highlighted over the underlining to really make note of the important things in here. And Baudelaire is one of my favorite poems. He has a wonderful blend of the dark with the sultry and a very poetic way of fashioning his thoughts. This volume, actually, I got of his prose work, came into my life much earlier than his seminal work, which we'll get to in a little while. Next, I have the first of many Penguin books we're going to be noting. This is poems of the late Tang dynasty, I guess, in China. Yep. And so this is a blend of stuff from many different writers. Han Yu, Ming Chao, Tu Fu. Hopefully there's some Li Po in here. They're probably changing his name to Li Ho. But anyway, I'll also have more to say about that writer a little bit later too. Anyway, wonderful nature poems in a lot of cases, travel poems, beautiful vignettes, and it's wonderful to breeze through these volumes with a number of different authors. Next, poems. See, you'll note that a lot of these are stripped or cut, I guess anyway, and so not for resale. I think the publisher does this, but at any rate, I got them at book sales anyway. Poems of Heaven and Hell from Ancient Mesopotamia. I have a really great love for ancient works from the Near and the Far East. Very poetic and rich in life advice, and I think that a lot of my development has come from studying these poetical works and during my developmental stage in college, just sitting around thinking about love and life and death and suffering, and also studying Western writers and European writers on topics such as those, but the poetry really just cuts right to the quick. And when you're thinking about the ancient mind and what they thought of the afterlife and how they came up out of the darkness of chaos, which was the prehistory, it's very interesting to see how they have structured the world around themselves and what they think about it through their writings. All right, skipping a couple of these volumes. These, in a few cases, I met people in my travels who were poets, and they offered up some of their texts, and in various cases, those were really good. But we're going to move on to more widely published works, such as this Dover collection. And this is not the last Dover book we're going to see. They have I guess the prices have probably gone up over the years, but now, like you can imagine, $250 for this wonderful collection of romantic poems. And what can I say about these Dover thrift editions? They are fantastic. For probably $50, you could get a really broad spectrum of wonderful poems. And I've had these books for so long, you can see that I've just tucked in, I don't know, this is just a sticker of Cali that I got at some point or another, and for some reason stuck it on there. And we'll come to other instances of me marking the books as time has went by. But the romantic poets, Blake especially, some of the, also in a lot of cases, breezy, effervescent works, light, but by no means frivolous. Wordsworth, of course, and just this one only has maybe half a dozen poems, but the ones that they have in here are very well represented with a wide spectrum of their work. And I guess of all of them, Blake, it's so easy to unfold his works, and it is a great It's like, you know, he had such a profound knowledge of the ache, the depth of pain in humanity, but also, on the flip side, the just the daring of excitement, just wonderment. All right, here we go with some Baudelaire. One of two copies of The Flowers of Evil. This, of course, is his only, well, his only in the modern, you know, in the modern day. This is really his only work that's lasted. But there's a lot of different translations, so I got a couple of translations. This one was only, I think it was a print-on-demand thing I got for like less than $5, and it's pretty good. You know, I don't really have anything bad to say about this particular translation. It doesn't include the French, which is fine. I can't read French, although I took French in middle and high school. Okay, here's the first of several haiku books. This one, actually, if you want to hear some poems, I did a series, 3 or 4 or 5 videos about me reading various poems. It's mostly just a big mishmash of stuff. But this book, I've read it in its entirety. I did it over the course of a year, doing each season as that season was beginning. And haiku is close, very, very, very close to my heart. There's, I like poetry in some cases where it's like a meandering. It's almost as if it could be an essay. A lot of very famous poets and a lot of wonderful material is in this format where it's, if you just took a paragraph and chopped it up and framed it in the right way, you've got the poetry. But you can just read it like sentences with, you know, all the attendant punctuation. However, haiku, once again, cutting right to the quick. You can get snippets that will resonate within you and resonate individually within different people in different ways, but the overarching theme is always there, and often it's melancholic, often there's a connection to nature, to the seasons, and they can be unfolded in so many different ways, and rather profound. I mean, just like with the Zen koans and stuff like that, you can really ruminate on a haiku, and it will take you places. And I am very astounded, and I do consider it probably my favorite poetical form. You know, sonnets and all these other types of things. Haiku is amazing to me. Let me think. Okay, another Dover book. Great short poems. Love it. I was just just talking about that nice cover on this one too. $1.50. And I've marked, you know, you can see so many pages that I've marked here. I've done random ways. In college especially, I was doing this in different formats. Like here I had this little key that I would keep for myself with a long stripe on the edge meant that it was the preceding page, and if it was a double stripe, it meant it was the opposite page, and the front of the book, sometimes I would mark things down and do various ways of tracking everything. A lot of these books were used in those videos I was just mentioning, but it's wonderful. If you can be very terse in your application of language and still reach down to the very core of humanity, it is going to be right up my alley. Speaking of Blake, here's one of the 2 Dover selections. That's Blake's works. This is a mixture of stuff. He has a good autumn, summer, spring, fall collection of stuff in here. That's actually what they start the book with. To spring to summer to autumn to winter. And various things, ballads and other stuff. This book, very inspirational to me. Travelogues. I don't know if you can find this stuff anymore. Who knows the value of it? Who knows if it's available? But here's a little stamp I got from Cheerios box when I was a kid. I've still got it. And that's me, one of my pictures. I guess my mom sent in one of my school pictures, and they sent back this little bitty stamp. And so in a lot of cases, my favorite books, I was stamping them. Anyway, this book has wisdom from the wisdom of the ages. I realize I'm up in the camera. Here we go. I want to make sure everything's good. So this is one page of couplets about probably 100 different topics. Employment, compassion, choosing friends, folly, begging, the eyes longing, love dreams, sign language. You know, but this is everything. Fame, vegetarianism, right conduct, rain, and you can get a wonderful snapshot of this writer's opinions about all manner of things related to life just by reading these couplets. And after you have read each page of it, throughout the different couplets, you get a resounding, overarching image. Okay, here's probably the best. This is one of the only ones, but this is probably the best compilation that I own, and it's old poetry, and I think that it's very, very well done with the pictures of most of the poets in the front and the back, and also on the covers. And a lot of underrepresented poets in here that aren't found in these later books, but very carefully curated with wonderful, wonderful selections from each one. And once again, just tons of paper marking my favorites. Best Love Poems from Dover. Nice cover. And this is what you would expect. Here on the back, it's got kind of a list of the who's who of the major poets. The 101. It's only got one or two from each one, but lots of them in here are worthwhile. The Brontes, all three of them. So various works by those ladies. And I like it. Here we have Bhartrihari and Bilihana. Bhartrihari, extremely inspirational to me. He has three different, down through time, we have received three of his collections. One is about a romance, one is about retiring to nature, and one is about like nobility and how they should relate to their the public. Oh, it's very, very strong, and it resonates with me in a very, very powerful way, especially his love poems. Okay, Hafiz, Garden of Heaven, love the title. Wonderful poems from the Near East. Each one of them quite a long journey, you're taking on. And they're just marked, they're just numbered, so they came to us, and we have luckily access to these ancient poems. And who knows, through the ages, who knows how much good poetry we've missed out on. Another collection of Zen poems from Dover. They have some haiku there and toward the back, and then they have some longer poems, and probably a couple dozen poets represented, as well as some contemporary stuff in the back. Not too bad. Well, I'll just this is just another compilation. I didn't really mean to feature these, but 100 writers from all around Europe. Wonderful to just dive into, and try to find a new favorite. This is from Fadil El-Azawi. The Miracle Maker was one of his books. I think he's a well-known Near Eastern poet who's prolific. In college, I went through, of course, every single poetry book on the shelves, and I found that I really liked, in particular, one of his poems, The Clown and the Dancer, and a couple of others. So when I was later thinking about books that I wanted to add to my collection, I bought this one probably off Amazon or something. But it inspired me quite a lot. It reminded me of various things that I was in, various experiences that I had. Okay, Rossetti, Christina, the sister of Dante. Wonderful death poems, fantastic. I have checkmarked almost every single poem in here, and in a lot of cases underlined tons of stuff. This is the stuff to read to come to terms with our mortality. I love her style. Very, very clear, very direct, and unflinching. Wonderful writer. Okay, Percy Shelley. I've not dived too much into this one because Shelley is in a lot of the other compilations. But I thought I would get a hold of it anyway. Long, long passages. Yeah, I should probably dive into that one a bit. Here's some writing from India. Let's see. New writing in India. Metaphysical poetry, another one from the Dover collection, the thrift editions, wonderful collections, as I mentioned. $3 for hundreds of poems. This one too probably has half a dozen very famous people from that period. John Donne looks like he's one of my favorites based on what I've marked. One of the methods I used was to just sort of like scratch a little notice to myself that these are the ones that I want to pay attention to. Andrew Marvell I seem to like quite a lot. And Thomas Traherne. Great. Here's an Oscar Wilde poetry collection. His Wit and Wisdom is another book published by Dover that I've dived much deeper into, but still a great technician with language. Songs of Kabir, fantastic. I've read this book a lot, and I was just skimming through it today and noting how many poems I had circled or otherwise remarked to myself with a quick jot of the pen what I was thinking about. This is like one of those take life by the horns types of authors, cutting through our illusion. This is the type of thing I was reading and heavily inspired by in college. Lipo, wonderful writer. He on the virtue of one of his poems, he became one of my favorite writers for some time. This collection, yeah, here's just one version I've got kind of in like a scroll format. This book is probably 90% commentary and history about these writers, and maybe a dozen poems by each one, so very scholarly sort of a volume, but Lipo had a profundity that I've still not quite accessed the depths of. Here's another Bhartrihari version. I couldn't resist buying this maybe close to 10 years ago, but it's a very freewheeling translation. As well, the Penguin version was extremely direct. The language was wonderfully direct. This one is way more flowery, and I'm not too sure if I like it. I've compared in a lot of cases these poems with the ones that I had grown to love, and it's like the translator takes way too many liberties, but still I'm going to hang on to it. I'm going to do a little bit more comparison of it in the future. Here's just the demo of a prose poem. This book actually is split into three. I have three various chunks of it, and unique among my collection because it's prose poems. So on occasion I'm in the mood to dive into those. Here we have another one that's marked with my Cheerios visage there. Basho. Travel writing. Maybe I should have brought out some of the other poems of Far Eastern writers from a long while ago, but it was common to do travelogues. So this one in particular is his journey to the northern part of the country, but it's, however, made much more interesting by the addition of these little pictures in a lot of cases, and he would do, this is his discourse about his journey, but then also it's just interspersed with wonderful poetic snippets. Basho, one of the best. Issa is my favorite haiku writer. Basho's great though. Okay, The Loom of Time by Kalidasa, plays and poems. Today, actually, once again, I was looking through and really finding a lot of pleasure in this. It's also heavily slanted towards romance and the transcendental qualities that we can find therein. The plays I've not gotten into. Although I was into theater in high school. We did a production of The Doctor in Spite of Himself, and I landed the Doctor. That was my role, but then it sort of faded. I took a couple of theater classes in college too, but mostly in high school. We had a wonderful theater teacher in high school. Conference of the Birds by Farin Uddin Nattar. So this is one I've not really read too much of, but I think that it's this overarching, probably all these poems are about birds, but each one of those birds can be unfolded into being a various part of society or some type of a personality of a deity or something. Who knows? I really need to dive into that. Sandberg, I have 2 of his collections. He is definitely He was alive during the period when Industrialism was coming up, and he has, I would say, a bad opinion of these smoke-choked factories and industrialism, how it strips away our humanity. And that one resonated with me because I did spend some time working in a car door factory. It was horrible. Anyway, Omar Khayyam, Ruby Yacht. So this was published several times, and these collections, probably this one too, will often have a couple of different versions of each poem throughout the different publication, throughout the publication history. Wonderful poems. Seeking for Transcendentalism, that's what we should all be doing. Speaking of that, Rumi, of course. I should probably have a more comprehensive collection of Rumi's works, but you know, this Dover one it does it for me. Any and everyone loves Rumi for good reason. Very nice teaching that's tailored to all different types of readers. Very direct teaching, while being not too direct. Okay, let's see. Here's another Omar Khayyam. I don't know. I got this one for probably a couple bucks. And nice cover there of some reclining students of poetry. Nicely presented, really, actually, here. I've not really skimmed through this one too much. I'm so accustomed to the other volume, but it's nice to have a couple of choices. Songs of Milarepa. This is a lot of religious, rambling religious stuff. Wonderful sketches about the Buddha and Buddhism and how Milarepa thought we should live our lives. Another Sandberg collection, Cornhuskers. I've not read this one nearly as much as Chicago Poems. Looks like he died in 1967 in July. Okay, Lao Tzu, the Tao. Speaking of that, got another one here. Probably have another one we'll get to later. Once again, I like to have several translations of works that really inspire me. And this one has a comment from the editor, some different scholarship related to each one of these poems. And the Tao is something that we should always include in our studies of world religions because it's very unique among them. And there's a nice, beautiful cover for this one. Everything will, of course, settle back into its natural groove, given enough time. Might be, from my interpretation, one of the overarching themes of the Tao. Gitanjali by Tagore, wonderful writer. I love this stark cover, really nice. And these are almost prose poems too. Each one of them about understanding our world and having an appropriate mindset about our position in it. Here's that Wit and Wisdom one from Oscar Wilde. Much better. I mean, it almost gives it, a lot of these are like couplets or just single lines that are, in some cases, profound. Here's my Edgar Allan Poe collection, also from Dover. Great cover. Some wonderful poems here, dark, gothic. Blake's most famous work, Songs of Innocence and Experience. Actually, a lot of these were recorded by another poet in the 60s. I forget which one he was. He was one of the Beats, not Kerouac, but the other one who was also really famous with the beard. Anyway, he did a performance with, he found a collection of musicians who did almost like a medieval or Ren Fair vibe, whistle and drum version of probably a dozen, maybe 24 of those. So belongs in any student's collection. English Victorian poetry, I really like this. As you can see, I got a lot of stuff here marked. Tennyson, this one has more poets than the other ones. I was noting that they only had like a half a dozen writers that were supposed to encapsulate that entire period. This one's got, maybe 20 poets. And in a lot of cases, some wonderful selections. Excellent. And for Raphaelite poetry, they just have, as you can tell, gone through every different various period of time and done some publication. Some crossover here because a lot of this is Rossetti, both of the siblings, and some other stuff. Another haiku collection. This one I think is unique because they have, in some cases, a couple of different translations, if I remember correctly, or at least they've mentioned the translators. They've really selected quite a lot of poets too. What I mean to say is you get a wide range of translation styles. And here's a beautiful haiku book. Very beautiful. It says moods and pleasures to share. Has 3 examples of poems on the back. So very spare, but a very wonderful collection. Imagist poetry, which I'm a big fan of. These are almost abstractions of abstractions. Once again, maybe 20 different poets. They can be very shifty in the way that they're describing things in a good way. Here's my biggest collection of Flowers of Evil. I mean size-wise, because it has both the French and the English, and a wonderful translation of everything. Love Baudelaire. Okay, collection of sonnets. Took me a while to get into sonnets, but now I really like them. Wonderful form. It can be interesting to see within the framework of a very strict structured poetical form what can be done. Okay, Wang Wei poems. Also probably from some ancient period. Wonderful nature vignettes, almost like looking at a beautiful landscape painting. And finally, Emily Dickinson. And I got this book at Barnes & Noble. And they had a big, I mean, it's really comprehensive. I don't know if this is every poem they found, but it's a lot of them. And she's a wonderful writer. She will take you down interesting alleyways, and she describes things in a style that's uniquely her own. And I think that, just as an aside, they found her collection of poems sealed up with twine and stacked in, just paper stacks. And she just written them mostly on just scraps of paper and bundled them. And long after she died, someone went into the estate and found that stuff and then published it later. I don't think she was famous in her life, but she deserves all of the fame that she has accrued over the years, in my opinion. So thank you for joining me while I talk about and reflect on my poetry books. It really is some of my favorite literature, inspiring, and the depth of understanding that I've come to about myself, about the world around me, about these concepts, love, death, suffering, and also profound joy. It's all there within those pages. So, thank you.